My name is Margaret. I'm 62 years old, and what I'm about to tell you will forever change how you see family loyalty. 3 days ago, my own son Oliver and his wife Sarah pushed my husband William and me off a 90-foot cliff in the Colorado Rockies. As I lay there broken and bleeding among the jagged rocks, I heard William's desperate whisper, "Margaret, don't move. Play dead." But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was when William revealed a secret so terrible that it shattered everything I believed about our family, a truth our children had hidden for 26 years. The morning started like any other family hiking trip. Sarah had packed sandwiches in our wicker basket, the same one I'd used for school picnics when I taught 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary. Oliver carried his expensive camera, claiming he wanted to capture memories to last forever. His words now echo in my mind with horrifying irony. I remember the exact moment everything changed. We were standing at Eagles Peak overlooked the autumn wind whipping through my gray hair, when Oliver positioned us near the cliff's edge for photos. "Step back a little more, Mom," he said, his voice carrying that same cold undertone I'd noticed creeping in over recent months. "I want to get the whole valley in the shot." Sarah raised the camera, but something in her eyes had shifted. The warmth was gone, replaced by a calculating coldness that made my skin crawl. "This will be perfect," she said, her voice no longer the sweet daughter-in-law I thought I knew. That's when Oliver lunged forward, his hands aimed at our chests. William, bless his carpenter's instincts, managed to grab Oliver's wrist at the last second. "If we're going down," William shouted with fury I'd never heard before, "you're coming with us." All 4 of us tumbled over the edge in a tangle of limbs and screams. The fall felt endless, 90 feet of pure terror, before we crashed into the rocky gorge below. I heard bones snap, felt my shoulder dislocate, tasted blood filling my mouth. The pain was so intense that unconsciousness seemed like mercy. But William's whispered command kept me anchored to consciousness. Play dead. Through slitted eyes, I watched our son and daughter-in-law assess their situation. Oliver had a broken leg, Sarah was clutching her ribs, but both were mobile enough to crawl toward the hiking trail. "Are the old folks dead?" Sarah asked, her sweet Colorado accent now laced with venom. Oliver checked our pulses with clinical detachment. "Yes, both of them. Eyes open, no breathing." His lie filled me with desperate hope. "Perfect," Sarah whispered, and I heard genuine satisfaction in her voice. "Now we can finally get what we deserve." As they painfully made their way up the gorge to summon help, I learned the full scope of their betrayal. They discussed their rehearsed story about the tragic accident, how they'd play the devastated survivors, and most chilling of all, how this wasn't their first murder. But to understand how we reached this moment of betrayal, I need to take you back 43 years to when William first carried me over the threshold of our little house on Maple Street in Cedar Falls, Colorado. William Hartley was the finest man Cedar Falls had ever produced. His hands, weathered from years of woodworking, could craft furniture so beautiful that Denver galleries begged to display his pieces. Every morning at sunrise, I'd watch him from our kitchen window as he walked to his workshop behind our house, coffee mug in hand, ready to transform raw timber into art. I taught 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary for 35 years. Every afternoon, I'd come home with stories about my students, little Tommy, who finally learned to read, or Susan, who wrote her first complete sentence. William would listen patiently while sanding chair legs or adjusting drawer hinges, occasionally looking up with those gentle brown eyes that made me fall in love with him all over again. We had 2 sons. Marcus, our firstborn, was everything parents dream of, kind, responsible, always helping his father in the workshop while maintaining straight A's in school. He inherited William's talent with wood and my patience with people. Even as a teenager, Marcus talked about taking care of us when we got older, about expanding William's business into something that could support 3 generations. Oliver arrived 5 years later, and from the beginning, he was different. Not bad exactly, but intense in ways that sometimes worried me. While Marcus would spend hours learning woodworking techniques, Oliver would sit in the corner of the workshop watching with calculating eyes as if he were studying rather than participating. "Mom," William said to me one evening when Oliver was 12, "have you noticed how Oliver looks at Marcus when he thinks no one's watching?" I had noticed. There was something unsettling about the way Oliver's gaze would follow his older brother, a mixture of resentment and envy that seemed too mature for a child. "He's just trying to find his own way," I told William, defending Oliver the way mothers do. "Marcus is hard to compete with." Looking back, I realized that was the first time I made excuses for Oliver's behavior, a pattern that would continue for decades and ultimately nearly cost us our lives. Our family traditions centered around Sunday dinners at the big oak table William had crafted for our 10th wedding anniversary. The whole extended family would gather: my sister Helen with her husband Jack, their twin daughters, William's brother Thomas with his wife and 3 boys. The house would fill with laughter, children running between rooms, women sharing recipes, while men fixed whatever needed fixing in the yard. Marcus fit naturally into these gatherings, helping serve food, engaging in conversations with adults, playing patiently with younger cousins. Oliver participated, but always seemed to be performing rather than genuinely enjoying himself. He'd flash perfect smiles and give charming answers to relatives' questions, but I sometimes caught him watching the family dynamics with that same calculating expression. During these years, our financial situation was comfortable, but not extravagant. William's custom furniture business provided steady income supplemented by my teaching salary. We saved, diligently invested conservatively, and by our 20th wedding anniversary, we owned our house outright, plus had accumulated nearly $50,000 in savings, a substantial sum for Cedar Falls in 1995. William kept meticulous records of our finances in a leather-bound ledger, updating entries every week after balancing our bank statements. This attention to detail, born from his craftsman's precision, would later prove crucial in uncovering Oliver's crimes. "Look at this," William said one Sunday evening when Oliver was 17, showing me the ledger with a puzzled expression. "We're missing $300 from the savings account. The bank says it was withdrawn last Tuesday, but neither of us made that withdrawal." I checked my purse, my teaching supplies, anywhere I might have forgotten spending money. Nothing. William called the bank thinking it might be an error, but they confirmed the withdrawal was made with our account information. Maybe Oliver needed money for something and was embarrassed to ask. I suggested still making excuses. When we asked Oliver about it, he seemed genuinely confused and concerned. $300. That's a lot of money. Are you sure it wasn't a bank mistake? His performance was so convincing that we apologized for even asking. The missing money was just the beginning. Over the next year, small amounts disappeared regularly, $50 here, $100 there. Always just enough to notice, but not enough to justify dramatic action. William started hiding our bank statements, checking them privately before sharing the news with me. "It's definitely Oliver," he told me one evening after discovering another unauthorized withdrawal. "I set a trap. I told him I was transferring money to a new account and gave him specific details that I knew were false. This week's withdrawal matches exactly what I told him." My heart sank. Our younger son was stealing from us, but the amounts were still small enough that I could convince myself it was just teenage mistakes, poor judgment that he'd outgrow. "He's probably just confused about money," I said weakly. "Maybe he thinks it's okay to borrow without asking." William's expression told me he knew better, but he loved me enough not to force the confrontation I wasn't ready for. The stealing might have continued indefinitely, if not for Marcus's sharp eye and sense of justice. Marcus discovered Oliver's theft in October 1996, just 2 months before his 21st birthday. He'd been helping William organize tax documents when he noticed the pattern of missing funds. "Dad," Marcus said, spreading bank statements across the workshop table. "Look at these withdrawal dates. They match exactly with times when Oliver asked to borrow the car for evening activities." William and I stared at the evidence our elder son had compiled. Withdrawal slips dates times all correlating with Oliver's whereabouts. The total amount stolen over 18 months was nearly $4,000. "We have to confront him," Marcus said firmly. "This isn't just borrowing. This is theft, and it's getting bigger every month." I felt my world tilting. The idea that one of my sons was deliberately stealing from us, that our family trust had been violated so systematically, made me physically ill. "Maybe we should talk to him privately first," I suggested. "Give him a chance to explain." But Marcus was already beyond diplomatic solutions. "Mom, he's been lying to us for over a year. Every time you asked about missing money, he acted confused and concerned while he was the one taking it. That's not confusion, that's manipulation." Marcus insisted on confronting Oliver that very evening. Against my better judgment, William and I agreed. We thought family honesty was always the best policy. That decision cost Marcus his life. The confrontation took place in our living room after dinner. Marcus had prepared his evidence, carefully bank statements, withdrawal records, even a timeline showing Oliver's activities corresponding with each theft. "Oliver," Marcus began gently, "we need to talk about some money that's gone missing from Mom and Dad's account." I watched Oliver's face as Marcus presented the evidence. Instead of shame or remorse, I saw something that chilled me to the bone: calculation. Oliver was already planning his next move before Marcus finished speaking. "That's impossible," Oliver said with perfect innocence. "Why would I steal from my own family?" But Marcus had anticipated this denial. "Because the withdrawals match your schedule exactly. Because you asked Dad about the account numbers last month. Because when we set up fake account information, you tried to access those fake accounts within days." Oliver's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing cold fury that transformed his face into something unrecognizable. Then he recovered, putting on an expression of hurt confusion. "Marcus, I can't believe you'd accuse me of this. We're brothers." "Brothers don't steal from their parents," Marcus replied firmly. "And brothers don't lie about it when caught." The argument escalated quickly. Oliver's denials became more desperate. Marcus's evidence became more detailed, and I found myself caught between my two sons, watching our family destroy itself. "If you don't return the money and confess to Mom and Dad," Marcus finally said, "I'll take this evidence to the police tomorrow." That threat triggered something in Oliver that none of us had ever seen before. He jumped to his feet, shouting about favoritism, about Marcus always being the perfect son, about how he deserved his share of the family's resources. "You've always had everything handed to you," Oliver screamed. "Mom and Dad worship you while I'm just the afterthought. Well, maybe it's time things changed around here." Marcus stood up to leave, disgusted by Oliver's outburst. "I'm done listening to this. Mom, Dad, you know what needs to happen. I'll be back tomorrow evening to hear Oliver's confession, or I'm calling the police." Marcus walked out the front door, heading toward the river trail he used for thinking when upset. We often walked that trail as a family. It led through the woods to a scenic overlook above Willow Creek. I should have followed him. William should have followed him. Instead, we stayed to comfort Oliver, who was now crying and claiming Marcus had always been jealous of him. 20 minutes later, Oliver announced he was going for a walk to clear his head. He seemed calmer, more rational, and I thought the fresh air might help him process what needed to happen next. William and I waited up until midnight for both boys to return. When only Oliver came back pale and shaken, we knew something was terribly wrong. "I couldn't find Marcus anywhere," Oliver reported, playing his role perfectly. "I looked all over town." We called the sheriff's department. Search teams found Marcus's body at dawn in the creek below the overlook, his neck broken from what appeared to be a fall from the rocky ledge above. Sheriff Morrison ruled it an accidental death. "Young man probably lost his footing in the dark," he told us with genuine sympathy. "That overlook gets slippery after sunset, especially this time of year." I believed that explanation because I needed to believe it. The alternative that one son had murdered the other was beyond my comprehension, but William knew better. William never told me what he'd seen that night until we were lying broken at the bottom of Eagle's Peak, certain we were about to die. For 26 years, my husband carried the burden of knowing our surviving son was a murderer. "I followed Oliver that night," William confessed as we waited in the darkness for rescue teams to find us. Something about his behavior after Marcus left worried me. Call it a father's instinct. William had maintained a discreet distance watching as Oliver caught up with Marcus at the river overlook. He'd positioned himself behind a cluster of pine trees where he could observe without being seen. They argued for about 10 minutes. William whispered, his voice breaking with 26 years of suppressed guilt. Oliver kept saying Marcus was ruining his life, that he'd rather see Marcus dead than let him destroy the family. Marcus tried to walk away, but Oliver grabbed his arm. What happened next was burned into William's memory with perfect, horrible clarity. Oliver shoved Marcus with both hands deliberately and with full force. Marcus tried to keep his balance, his arms windmilling as he fought gravity. For maybe 3 seconds he might have recovered. Then Oliver stepped forward and pushed him again. William heard Marcus scream as he fell 60 feet to the creek bed below. He heard the sickening impact of body against rock, heard the sudden silence that meant his firstborn son was dead. Oliver stood there for maybe a minute looking down at Marcus's body. Then he started to cry, but Margaret, they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of relief. When Oliver noticed William watching from the trees, he didn't try to run or deny what had happened. Instead, he walked over calmly and delivered the performance of his life. Dad. Oliver said, his voice trembling with manufactured trauma. It was an accident. Marcus attacked me when I tried to talk to him about the money. He swung at me, lost his balance, and fell. I tried to grab him, but it was too late. William looked into our son's eyes and saw no remorse, no genuine grief, only calculation about what story would be most believable. I should have called the police right then, William told me as we lay bleeding. But he was my son, Margaret, my only remaining son, and Marcus was already dead. I convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, it really had been an accident. Oliver had 26 years to perfect his performance as the grieving brother, the dutiful son who tried his best to fill Marcus's shoes. And he was brilliant at it. He stopped stealing money immediately after Marcus's death, at least in obvious ways. He became more helpful around the house, more attentive to William and me, more involved in family activities. He even started working seriously in William's workshop, developing genuine skill with woodworking tools. I thought he'd learned his lesson, William said. I thought losing Marcus had shocked him into becoming a better person. Every day that passed made it easier to believe the lie. Oliver married Sarah Mackenzie 3 years after Marcus's death. Sarah was a local girl daughter of the Methodist minister, known throughout Cedar Falls for her sweet nature and charitable work. She seemed to genuinely love Oliver, and he appeared devoted to her. They had 2 children, Marcus Jr., named after his deceased uncle, and little Emma. Both children were beautiful, well-behaved, and clearly adored their grandparents. For 15 years, we seemed like a normal, loving family again. But Oliver never stopped stealing. He just got smarter about it. The amounts were smaller, William explained, and spread across different accounts. I'd noticed $50 missing here, $100 there, but never enough to justify reopening old wounds. I told myself he was just occasionally short on money, that as long as the amount stayed small, it wasn't worth destroying our fragile family peace. William estimated that over the years since Marcus's death, Oliver had stolen nearly $30,000 from us. Not enough to bankrupt us, but enough to fund investments, purchases, and lifestyle choices he couldn't otherwise afford. The real crisis began 8 months ago, when William and I decided to update our wills in preparation for retirement. At 62 and 65, William and I had accumulated what we considered a comfortable retirement fund. The house was worth $200,000. We had another $150,000 in savings and investments, plus William's workshop and tools were valued at nearly $50,000. By Cedar Falls standards, we were quite well off. Our original plan was to divide everything equally between Oliver and Marcus's children. Oliver would inherit the house and workshop, while Marcus Jr. and Emma would receive trust funds for their education and futures. But Oliver had different ideas. "Mom, Dad," he said during one of his increasingly frequent visits, "I've been thinking about your estate planning, and I'm worried about the complexity you're creating." Sarah nodded supportively. stroking my hand with those fingers that would later push me toward death. We love the kids so much, but managing inheritance trusts across different beneficiaries could create tax problems and family conflicts. Oliver's proposal was elegantly simple: name him and Sarah as sole heirs, with the understanding that they would responsibly manage distributions to Marcus Jr. and Emma when appropriate. Besides, Oliver added with that charming smile he'd perfected over the years, you're going to need us when you get older. It's better for us to have legal access to your resources so we can take care of you properly. Something about his tone made my skin crawl, though I couldn't articulate why. William seemed more receptive to the idea, possibly because he felt guilty about the secret he'd been keeping for so long. We signed the new will on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I remember Sarah wearing a beautiful blue dress and giving me an especially long hug afterward. Now we're officially one family forever, she whispered in my ear. Her words gave me chills, though I didn't understand why at the time. The real pressure began in May, when Oliver and Sarah started visiting twice a week instead of their usual monthly family dinners. Every conversation somehow turned to our finances, our plans, our preparation for the future. Mom, this house is really too big for two people your age, Sarah would observe while examining our furniture with calculating eyes. Have you considered downsizing to something more manageable? Dad, your workshop equipment is worth a fortune just sitting there, Oliver would add. Maybe it's time to sell some of those expensive tools and simplify your life. Their suggestions always sounded reasonable in isolation, but the pattern was unmistakable. They wanted us to liquidate our assets and become financially dependent on them. If something happens to one of you, Oliver explained during one particularly intense conversation, the survivor would need our help immediately. But if all your money is tied up in property and equipment, we wouldn't be able to access it quickly enough to help. The logic was seductive, especially when presented by a son who seemed so caring, and a daughter-in-law who appeared genuinely concerned about our welfare. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being manipulated. William, I said one evening after Oliver and Sarah left, doesn't it seem strange that they're suddenly so interested in our financial affairs? Oliver never cared about money management before. William's reaction surprised me. Instead of dismissing my concerns, he looked genuinely troubled. I've been wondering the same thing, he admitted. There's something about the way Sarah asks questions so specific, so detailed. She knows exactly how much our savings accounts are worth, exactly what the house appraised, for exactly which tools in my workshop are most valuable. That night, William did something he hadn't done since Marcus's death. He started investigating Oliver's finances. What he discovered was terrifying. Oliver's carpentry business was failing catastrophically. Despite years of training with William and natural talent with woodworking, Oliver had made a series of disastrous financial decisions that left him more than $100,000 in debt. William discovered that Oliver had borrowed heavily to expand his business, purchasing expensive equipment and renting a large workshop space that he couldn't afford. When the local economy slowed and custom furniture orders declined, Oliver couldn't meet his loan payments. Worse, he'd borrowed money from private lenders at predatory interest rates. Men who weren't patient about repayment schedules. Margaret, William told me as we reviewed the documents he'd gathered. Oliver owes $75,000 to legitimate banks, but he also owes $30,000 to people who advertise their services on telephone poles. The loan sharks had been pressuring Oliver for months. William had copies of threatening letters, records of hostile phone calls, even photographs of men who'd visited Oliver's workshop to discuss payment arrangements. He's desperate, William said grimly. And desperate people do desperate things. Sarah was fully aware of their financial situation. William discovered emails between them discussing various schemes to accelerate their inheritance timeline. The language was carefully coded, but the intent was clear: they were planning to kill us. The most chilling document was a life insurance application Oliver had forged with our signatures, purchasing a policy that would pay Sarah $500,000 upon our deaths. Look at the date, William said, pointing to the application. He filed this 3 days after we signed the new will. Oliver had been planning our murders for months, possibly years. Every suggestion about downsizing, every concern about our safety, every expression of love and care had been calculated steps toward our execution. William and I faced an impossible choice: report our son to the police and watch him go to prison for fraud and planning murder, or wait and hope he'd abandon his scheme before carrying it out. We can't just wait to die, I told William. But I can't bear the thought of sending Oliver to prison, especially if it means Marcus Jr. and Emma lose both parents. William had been wrestling with the same dilemma. Maybe we can confront him, he suggested. Show him we know what he's planning, force him to get help and pay back the money legitimately. It was naive, but we were parents trying to save our child from himself. We never got the chance to have that conversation. Oliver called the next morning with his invitation to the special family hiking trip to celebrate our 43rd wedding anniversary. I've been thinking, he said with that cheerful voice that now sounded sinister. We should do something really memorable to honor your marriage. How about we hike up to Eagles Peak? You've always talked about seeing the view from up there. My blood turned to ice. Eagles Peak was a 90-foot cliff overlooking the entire valley, the perfect place for a murder disguised as an accident. That sounds lovely, son, I managed to reply, but let us think about it and get back to you. After hanging up, William and I looked at each other with the terrible knowledge that we'd just received an invitation to our own execution. He's going to kill us on that mountain, I whispered. William nodded grimly. Just like he killed Marcus at the river overlook. But we also realized this might be our only chance to get evidence of Oliver's intentions. If we refused the hiking invitation, he'd simply find another opportunity, another method. At least on the mountain, we might have a chance to record his confession or gather proof of his murderous intent. William charged his phone fully and set it to record continuously. If we don't survive, he said, at least someone will know the truth. We spent our last evening at home, holding each other, telling stories about the 43 years we'd shared, trying not to think about the horror awaiting us at Eagles Peak. Neither of us slept that night. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear, perfect hiking weather that seemed to mock our situation. Oliver arrived early, whistling cheerfully and carrying professional quality hiking equipment. Morning lovebirds, he called from the front door. Ready for your big adventure. Sarah appeared behind him, radiant as a bride on her wedding day, except this was a wedding with death. During breakfast, which we could barely touch, Oliver explained the hiking route in detail. It's a beautiful trail, he said, spreading topographical maps across our kitchen table. 3 miles of gradual ascent, then a quarter-mile climb to the actual peak. The views are supposed to be incredible. Of course, the views would be incredible. They would be the last thing we'd see. The trail has some challenging sections, Sarah added sweetly. But nothing experienced hikers like you can't handle. Her comment about our supposed hiking experience would have been laughable under different circumstances. William and I walked around the neighborhood for exercise. We weren't mountain climbers. As we loaded the car, I watched Oliver meticulously check his backpack, ensuring he had everything needed for his plan. I saw rope, a small entrenching tool, emergency flares, and something that looked like a GPS device. What's that for? I asked, pointing to the GPS. Safety, Oliver replied without hesitation. If something goes wrong, rescue teams can find us quickly. Of course, he'd want our bodies found promptly. The sooner we were discovered, the sooner he and Sarah could collect their inheritance and pay off his debts. The drive to the trailhead took 90 minutes through increasingly remote Colorado mountain country. Sarah chatted cheerfully about the beautiful scenery, occasionally taking pictures through the car windows. These will be such wonderful memories, she said, and I realized she was already creating evidence for their version of events. Oliver drove carefully, obeying every speed limit and traffic sign. He couldn't risk a car accident that might interfere with his murder plans. During the drive, William discreetly activated his phone's recording function. Everything that happened from that moment would be preserved, assuming we survived long enough to share it with authorities. The trailhead parking area was nearly deserted, another element of Oliver's careful planning. Fewer witnesses meant fewer complications for their cover story. Ready for the adventure? Oliver asked as we shouldered our packs. I looked into his eyes and saw the same cold calculation he'd shown the night he murdered Marcus. For the first time in 26 years, Oliver had stopped pretending to love us. The trail started easily enough, winding through dense pine forest and alongside a crystal-clear mountain stream. Under different circumstances, it would have been a lovely family outing. Sarah walked ahead of us, constantly taking pictures and commenting on the natural beauty around us. "Look at those wildflowers," she'd exclaim, or "Listen to that bird." Her performance as the enthusiastic nature lover was flawless. Oliver walked behind William and me, supposedly to ensure we didn't fall behind, but I could feel his eyes on our backs like targeting lasers. Every time I turned to look at him, he smiled with practiced warmth, but I could see the predator underneath. "How are you doing, Mom and Dad?" he'd ask with fake concern. "Need to stop and rest." After 2 hours of hiking, we reached the base of the final ascent to Eagle's Peak. The trail became much steeper, winding up exposed rock faces with minimal handholds. "This is the challenging part," Oliver announced, as if he were a professional guide instead of our would-be executioner. "Stay close together and watch your footing." My legs were already trembling from exhaustion. At 62, I wasn't prepared for this level of physical exertion. William was breathing heavily, his carpenter's strength no match for the demands of mountain climbing. Oliver and Sarah had planned this perfectly. By the time we reached the killing ground, we'd be too tired to resist effectively. The climb took another hour of grueling effort. Several times I thought my heart might give out from the combination of physical exertion and psychological terror. William had to help me over particularly difficult sections, and I could see his own strength failing. "Almost there," Sarah called encouragingly from above. "The view is going to be worth every step." Finally, we reached Eagle's Peak, and I had to admit the view was spectacular. The entire valley spread below us like a patchwork quilt, with the town of Cedar Falls visible as a cluster of tiny buildings near the river. In any other circumstance, this would have been a moment of triumph and beauty. Instead, it was our execution ground. "Come over here for pictures," Sarah called, positioning herself near the cliff's edge. "I want to get the valley in the background." This was it. The moment Oliver had been planning for months. William and I approached the edge slowly, each step bringing us closer to our deaths. I could see Oliver calculating angles and distances, positioning himself for the perfect push that would send us tumbling 90 feet to the rocks below. "Perfect," Sarah said, raising her camera. "Now put your arms around each other and smile." William and I embraced probably for the last time while she took picture after picture. Each camera flash felt like lightning announcing the storm about to break over us. "Take one more," Oliver suggested, moving closer to us. "But step back a little so we can see more of the landscape." One step back would put us exactly at the precipice edge, with nothing but empty air behind us. We moved back as instructed, feeling solid ground disappear beneath our heels. The abyss yawned behind us, waiting to swallow our bodies and our secrets. Sarah raised the camera once more, but this time something had changed in her expression. The mask of sweetness had fallen away, revealing the cold-blooded killer underneath. "Smile," she said in a voice no longer gentle. "This is your last photo." Oliver lunged forward with his arms extended, aiming for our chests with practiced precision. This was the moment he'd been visualizing for months, the single push that would solve all his financial problems and eliminate the only witnesses to Marcus's murder. But William had been preparing for this moment too. In the last split second, he managed to grab Oliver's wrists and pull him toward the edge. "If we're going to die," William shouted with 26 years of suppressed rage, "you're coming with us!" All four of us teetered on the precipice, locked in a macabre dance between life and death. Sarah screamed and tried to help Oliver break free, but momentum and gravity were stronger than her efforts. I felt the ground crumble beneath my feet, felt the terrible sensation of falling begin. Then all four of us were tumbling through the air, screaming as the rocky ground rushed up to meet us. The impact was devastating. I heard bones breaking, felt my shoulders separate, tasted blood filling my mouth. Pain beyond description shot through my body as I bounced off rocks and finally came to rest in a tangle of broken limbs. But miracle of miracles, I was still alive. William's desperate whisper reached me through the haze of agony. "Margaret, don't move! Play dead!" For the next 20 minutes, lying motionless among the rocks while pretending to be dead, I listened to Oliver and Sarah discuss their situation with the casual callousness of professional killers. "Are the old people dead?" Sarah asked, examining our still forms. Oliver checked our pulses with clinical detachment. "Both of them. No breathing, no heartbeat. Perfect." His satisfied tone made my blood run cold. This was our son, our baby, expressing pleasure at our supposed deaths. "Now what?" Sarah asked. "We both have broken bones. How do we explain surviving when they didn't?" Oliver had already worked out these details. "Simple. We tell everyone exactly what I told Dad that night Marcus died. It was a tragic accident. We were taking pictures when a rock gave way under their feet. They fell, and we tried to help, but fell ourselves. The only difference is this time we survived." They spent several minutes rehearsing their story, making sure every detail matched perfectly. Oliver would tell investigators that I'd stepped too close to the edge while posing for photos. When the ground crumbled, William tried to save me, but was pulled down as well. Oliver and Sarah's own fall would be explained as a heroic but unsuccessful rescue attempt. "Remember," Oliver told Sarah as she applied makeshift bandages to his broken leg, "we're the traumatized survivors of a family tragedy. We lost our beloved parents in a horrible accident. People will feel sorry for us, not suspicious. But the most horrifying revelation came when Sarah asked about the insurance money. How long before we can collect? She wanted to know. Oliver's response chilled me to the bone. The life insurance pays out immediately after death certificates are issued. $500,000 plus whatever we inherit from their estate. More than enough to pay off all our debts and start fresh. "What about the kids?" Sarah asked. "Marcus Jr. and Emma were supposed to get trust funds." Oliver's laugh was genuinely cruel. "They'll get whatever we decide to give them. Maybe college funds if they're good. But the bulk of the money stays with us. We've earned it." They had earned it by murdering William's brother 26 years ago and now trying to murder us. In Oliver's twisted logic, patricide was simply collecting payment owed. As they prepared to crawl toward the hiking trail to summon help, Oliver made one final comment that confirmed everything William and I had suspected. "You know what the best part is?" he told Sarah. "After today, there won't be anyone left who knows what really happened to Marcus. Dad was the only witness, and now he's dead too." Oliver was wrong about that. William was alive, his phone was still recording, and we now had complete confessions from both killers. But first, we had to survive long enough to share that evidence with the world. After Oliver and Sarah's voices faded into the distance, William and I began assessing our injuries. He had several broken ribs and a compound fracture in his left leg. I had a dislocated shoulder, possible concussion, and lacerations that were bleeding steadily. We were alive but barely and trapped at the bottom of a 90-foot cliff with no way to climb out. "The phone kept recording," William whispered. "We have everything, their confessions, their plans, their celebration of our supposed deaths. If rescue teams find us alive, we can end this nightmare." But we faced a terrible dilemma. When help arrived, Oliver and Sarah would be there too, still playing their roles as grieving family members. If they realized we'd survived and heard their confessions, they might find a way to silence us permanently before we could reach the authorities. "We have to keep pretending to be dead," I whispered to William. "At least until we're alone with the rescue teams." It was a desperate gamble, but our only chance. 2 hours later, we heard helicopters approaching and voices calling from above. The rescue operation had begun. "They're down here," Oliver's voice shouted from the clifftop, his performance as the devastated son absolutely convincing. My parents, please hurry. If I hadn't known the truth, I would have believed he was a man destroyed by witnessing his parents' accidental deaths. Sir, stay calm, a rescue coordinator called back. We're coming down to assess the situation. Can you and your wife move? We're hurt, but we can move. Sarah responded, her voice perfectly pitched to convey brave suffering. But I think they're gone. The rescue team descended on ropes, their equipment clanking against the rock face as they approached our location. I kept my eyes closed and my breathing as shallow as possible, maintaining the illusion of death. We have 2 victims at the bottom. The first responder reported into his radio. Elderly couple, multiple trauma injuries. Checking vitals now. I felt his fingers on my neck, searching for a pulse. My heart was beating so hard, I was afraid he'd detect it, but apparently the irregularity from shock and pain made it difficult to find. This one has a very weak pulse, he announced, referring to William. The woman, I'm not getting anything. We need immediate medical transport. Perfect. They believed William was barely alive while I appeared dead, which meant Oliver and Sarah wouldn't see us as an immediate threat. The extraction process took over an hour. Rescue teams secured us to backboards, hoisted us up the cliff face, and loaded us into waiting ambulances. Throughout the entire process, I had to remain completely limp and unresponsive, while fighting every instinct to cry out from the pain. During the helicopter flight to the hospital, I could hear the medical team working frantically to keep William stable. His injuries were more severe than mine, and for terrifying moments, I thought he might actually die before we could reveal the truth. Blood pressure's dropping, someone reported. We're losing him. Not on my watch. The lead paramedic replied grimly. Push another unit of plasma and increase the oxygen flow. At the hospital, we were rushed into separate emergency rooms. I was taken to a trauma bay where doctors began examining my corpse for evidence of what had killed me. This was the most dangerous part of our deception. Medical professionals would quickly realize I was alive if they conducted thorough examinations. I needed to find a way to communicate with someone I could trust before Oliver and Sarah arrived to continue their performance. My opportunity came when a young nurse named Isabella was left alone with me while doctors consulted about William's condition in the next room. She was updating my chart when I risked opening my eyes slightly and moving one finger. Isabella gasped and immediately checked my pulse and breathing. "Doctor," she called out, "she's alive." Dr. Martinez rushed in and confirmed Isabella's assessment. "How is this possible? The rescue team reported no vital signs." "I need to tell you something," I whispered as quietly as possible. "My son and daughter-in-law tried to murder us. They think we're dead. Please don't let them know I'm alive until I can talk to the police." Dr. Martinez stared at me in shock, clearly struggling to process what I'd said. "Ma'am, you've suffered severe trauma. You might be confused. My husband has a recording on his phone." I interrupted urgently. "Everything they said, their confessions, their plans. Please, you have to get the police before Oliver realizes we're alive." The doctor looked skeptical, but Isabella had been watching my vital signs and could confirm I was lucid and coherent. "What if she's telling the truth?" Isabella asked. "What if those people really did try to kill them?" Dr. Martinez made the decision that saved our lives. "Isabella, contact hospital security immediately. Don't let anyone into this room except police officers. I'm calling the sheriff's department." 20 minutes later, Sheriff Davidson arrived with 2 deputies. I told him everything: Marcus's murder 26 years ago, Oliver's debts, and forged insurance policies, the planned hiking trip execution, and most importantly, the recording on William's phone. If what you're saying is true," Sheriff Davidson said grimly, "we need to move fast. Your son and daughter-in-law are in the waiting room right now, playing the part of grieving family members." The sheriff retrieved William's phone and played back the recordings. When he heard Oliver and Sarah's voices discussing their successful murder plot and celebrating our deaths, his expression darkened with professional anger. "We have enough evidence to arrest them immediately," he told me. "But I want them to incriminate themselves further. Are you willing to help us set a trap?" I agreed without hesitation. After 26 years of living with a murderer who'd never faced justice for killing Marcus, I wanted Oliver to experience complete and final consequences for his crimes. The plan was elegantly simple. Medical staff would inform Oliver and Sarah that I had unexpectedly regained consciousness but was in critical condition and asking for my son. When Oliver came to my bedside believing I was too injured to be a threat, undercover officers would be listening to every word. Oliver's performance when he entered my room was masterful. Tears flowed down his cheeks as he took my hand and spoke with perfect parental devotion. "Mom, thank God you're alive," he said, his voice breaking with manufactured emotion. "Sarah and I are so sorry we couldn't save you and Dad from falling. We tried to reach you, but we fell too." But then his mask slipped slightly. He leaned closer and whispered words that the hidden microphones captured perfectly. "I hope you remember that accidents happen to people who know too much. Just like what happened to Marcus all those years ago." His threat was unmistakable, and the recording equipment captured every word. Sheriff Davidson entered the room immediately with his deputies. "Oliver Hartley, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of your parents and the murder of your brother Marcus Hartley." Oliver's face went through a remarkable transformation as he realized his carefully constructed lies were crumbling around him. Shock, then rage, then calculation as he tried to formulate new deceptions. "This is ridiculous," he protested as deputies handcuffed him. "My parents are confused from their injuries. They don't know what they're saying." But Sarah's reaction when she was arrested in the waiting room confirmed everything. Instead of protesting innocence, she immediately tried to negotiate a plea bargain by offering to testify against Oliver in exchange for reduced charges. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," she told detectives. "Oliver planned everything. He said it was the only way to save our family from bankruptcy." Her willingness to betray Oliver the moment she was caught revealed the true nature of their relationship. There had been no love between them, only mutual greed and shared guilt. The trial lasted 6 weeks and became the biggest news story in Cedar Falls history. Local newspapers covered every detail of what they called the Cliff murder plot, and national media picked up the story as an example of family greed gone terrifyingly wrong. William recovered from his injuries more slowly than I did, but his testimony was the most compelling evidence presented to the jury. When he described watching Oliver murder Marcus 26 years ago, then covering up the crime to protect his surviving son, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. "I thought I was saving my family," William said from the witness stand, his voice heavy with decades of regret. "Instead, I enabled a killer to plan more murders. My silence made me complicit in Oliver's crimes." The prosecutor presented overwhelming evidence: the recorded confessions, forged insurance documents, Oliver's massive debts, the pattern of financial theft spanning decades, and testimony from loan sharks who'd been pressuring him for payment. Oliver's defense attorney tried to argue that the Cliff incident was indeed accidental, that the recorded conversations were taken out of context, and that Oliver's threats to me in the hospital were misunderstood expressions of concern. But the jury saw through these desperate lies. After deliberating for less than 4 hours, they returned guilty verdicts on all charges: first-degree murder for Marcus's death, attempted murder for the Cliff attack, insurance fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder. Oliver was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Sarah received 25 years for conspiracy and attempted murder after cooperating with prosecutors. Her testimony filled in crucial details about their planning process and confirmed that both murders were premeditated rather than crimes of passion. During the sentencing hearing, I was allowed to make a victim impact statement. Looking directly at Oliver, I tried to find some remnant of the son I'd once loved. "I keep trying to understand when you stopped being my child and became a stranger," I told him. "Was it when you first stole money from us, when you murdered Marcus? Or did something in you break so long ago that I never really knew who you were?" Oliver showed no remorse, no recognition of the pain he'd caused. He stared at me with the same cold calculation I'd seen in his eyes at Eagle's Peak. "You always loved Marcus more than me," he said, his final words to the family he'd destroyed. "Now, you know what it feels like to lose everything." Even facing life in prison, Oliver remained convinced that he was the victim, that his crimes were justified by imagined parental favoritism. After the trial, William and I faced the challenge of rebuilding our lives and healing from betrayals that went far deeper than physical injuries. We sold our house on Maple Street. Too many memories, too much pain associated with the place where we'd raised a murderer. With the money from the sale and our retirement savings, we bought a smaller house near the elementary school, where I'd taught for so many years. More importantly, we gained custody of Marcus Jr. and Emma, who had lost both parents to prison and needed grandparents who could provide stability and love. "Well, Grandma," Marcus Jr. asked me one evening as we looked through photo albums together, "why did Dad do those terrible things?" I struggled to find an answer that would make sense to a 12-year-old boy. "Sometimes people make very bad choices," I told him. "Your father forgot what family really means. Family means protecting each other, not hurting each other." "Will you and Grandpa protect us?" Emma asked, her 7-year-old eyes still reflecting the trauma of learning her parents were killers. "Always," William promised, pulling both children close. "That's what real family does." The children are thriving now, 2 years after the trial. Marcus Jr. is developing his grandfather's talent for woodworking and his uncle Marcus's sense of justice. Emma shows remarkable resilience and an ability to find joy despite the darkness in her family history. We tell them stories about their Uncle Marcus, how kind he was, how he always tried to do the right thing, how he would have loved them deeply if he'd lived to meet them. Through these stories, Marcus's memory lives on in a new generation that will understand the difference between right and wrong. William and I have also found peace with each other after the terrible secrets that nearly destroyed us. His 26 years of silence about Marcus's murder created a barrier between us that I wasn't sure could ever be overcome. "I was trying to protect what was left of our family," he explained during one of many long conversations about forgiveness and trust. "But I see now that keeping Oliver's secret didn't protect anyone. It just gave him time to plan more murders. We both made mistakes," I replied. "I made excuses for Oliver's behavior, ignored warning signs, chose to believe lies because the truth was too painful. We're both responsible for what almost happened." Today, as I finish writing this memoir, William and I are preparing for our 45th wedding anniversary. We'll celebrate quietly with Marcus Jr. and Emma in our little house filled with William's beautiful furniture and photographs of the family we've managed to save. Sometimes people ask me if I ever visit Oliver in prison, if I still consider him my son. The answer is complicated. I mourn the child I thought I raised, the son I believed existed for 38 years. That person was never real. He was a carefully constructed lie designed to manipulate my maternal love. The man in prison who murdered his brother and tried to murder his parents is a stranger to me. I feel no obligation to visit him, write to him, or maintain any relationship with him. But I pray for him sometimes, not because I forgive him, but because I hope that someday he might feel genuine remorse for the lives he destroyed and the trust he betrayed. The most important lesson I've learned from this nightmare is that family isn't defined by blood or DNA. Family is defined by love, loyalty, protection, and sacrifice for each other's well-being. Oliver shared our DNA, but he was never truly our family. Marcus Jr. and Emma became our family through love and commitment, not biological connection. William and I chose each other as family 45 years ago, and we choose each other again every day as we build a life based on honesty, trust, and genuine care for each other's happiness. We survived the cliff that was meant to be our grave. More importantly, we survived the betrayal that was meant to destroy our souls. And in saving ourselves, we saved two beautiful children who will grow up understanding that true family means never ever pushing the people you love off cliffs, literal or metaphorical. That's the legacy we're building now. A family based on truth instead of lies, love instead of greed, protection instead of exploitation. It's a legacy Marcus would be proud of, and one that honors his memory far better than silence ever could. The cliff we survived taught us that falling doesn't have to mean dying. Sometimes it means landing in a place where healing can finally begin. As I write these final words, Marcus Jr. is 17 and has been accepted to Colorado State University's engineering program, the same field his uncle Marcus dreamed of pursuing. Emma is 12 and wants to be a teacher just like her grandmother. William's woodworking has taken on new meaning. He's teaching both children the craft, not just as a skill, but as a meditation on patience, precision, and the satisfaction of creating beauty from raw materials. Grandpa, Emma said last week while learning to sand a jewelry box she's making for my birthday, "I like that wood doesn't lie to you. If you measure wrong or cut crooked, it shows. But if you do it right, it turns into something beautiful." Her words perfectly captured what we've learned about life, family, and the importance of building relationships on solid foundations rather than deceptive appearances. Oliver is still in prison, and as far as I know, he has never expressed remorse for his crimes. Sarah was released on parole last year and moved to another state. We have no contact with either of them, nor do we want any. But their children, our grandchildren, are thriving in an environment where love doesn't come with conditions, where trust doesn't require constant vigilance, and where family means safety rather than danger. The cliff at Eagles Peak has been closed to hikers after several other accidents. A memorial plaque honors all the people who died there, including Marcus, whose death finally received official recognition as murder rather than accident. Sometimes William and I drive up to the viewing area below the peak not to relive our trauma, but to remember how close we came to losing everything, and how grateful we are for the life we've built from the wreckage. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd reported Oliver after Marcus died? William asked during one of these visits. I considered his question carefully. Marcus would still be dead, I finally answered. But maybe Oliver would have gotten help instead of spending 26 years planning more murders. Maybe Sarah would have married someone who didn't need her to be an accomplice. Maybe their children wouldn't have had to lose both parents to prison. But then again, William replied, maybe Oliver was already too far gone to save. Maybe some people are just born without the capacity for genuine love or remorse. I don't know the answer to that question, and I've stopped trying to solve the mystery of how a child raised with love can grow into a killer. What I do know is that evil exists sometimes in the people closest to us, and that recognizing it early might be the only way to prevent tragedy. I also know that survival is possible, that healing can happen, and that families can be rebuilt on foundations of truth rather than lies. The cliff we survived became the foundation for a stronger family, a deeper marriage, and a clearer understanding of what really matters in life. We didn't just survive the fall. We learned to fly. End of The Cliff We Survived, a Mother's Confession of Family Betrayal.